The rain tapped against the towering windows of our penthouse, a rhythmic hum that masked the quiet storm brewing within me. My husband, Nathan Clark, stood across the dining room, his reflection a dark silhouette against the shimmering city skyline. His laughter carried through the room, effortless and confident as he spoke into his phone, no doubt discussing another one of his latest big deals. For years, I had played the role of the supportive wife, the unassuming partner standing in the shadow of his growing success. But tonight, that illusion was over. I had spent the afternoon at Clark Manor, my grandfather's grand estate, a place steeped in generations of history, a place Nathan always viewed as just another asset in his growing empire. The iron gates had always represented security, a fortress that shielded my family's legacy. But today, those same gates had swung open to a stranger who claimed to be the new owner. "That's impossible," I had said, my voice steady, but my pulse raging beneath the surface. "I'm afraid not, Mrs. Clark," the woman had replied, flipping through her pristine real estate files. "The documents are all in order, final sale pending signatures. Your husband confirmed everything this morning." The world around me had stilled. Nathan had sold my family's estate behind my back, the home that had belonged to my grandfather, the place where my parents had raised me after their tragic accident, was now being handed off like a disposable commodity. And yet, when I looked at the woman before me, dressed in designer heels and holding a Mont Blanc pen, I realized something strange. "Who's the buyer?" I asked, my voice laced with something far darker than curiosity. The agent hesitated. "It's an anonymous investment trust," she admitted, shifting slightly under my stare. My heart hammered as the puzzle pieces began clicking into place. An anonymous trust, the way Nathan had been moving money recently. The sudden surge of overseas investments he had insisted were for our future. He wasn't just selling the estate, he was preparing to disappear with the money. And worse, he didn't think I would notice. I clenched my fists, forcing a slow breath as I processed the cold betrayal. Back in the penthouse, Nathan finally ended his call, turning to me with the same smug smile he had perfected over the years. The kind that once charmed me, but now only revealed the depths of his arrogance. "You look tense, sweetheart," he murmured, crossing the room and pressing a kiss to my temple. It took every ounce of my control not to recoil. Busy day? If only he knew. "Nothing I couldn't handle," I replied smoothly, stepping back and studying his face. This man who thought he had me fooled. Nathan had always underestimated me. In his world, charm and confidence were enough to keep people distracted. He thought my silence was submission, my patience a sign of weakness. What he failed to realize was that I had spent years learning how to play his game, and now I was about to change the rules. A slow smile spread across my lips as I reached for my wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid as though it held no significance. But inside, my mind was already setting the first pieces of his downfall into motion. "By the way," I said, watching his expression closely, "I ran into an interesting woman today. A real estate agent, actually." Nathan hesitated for only a fraction of a second before recovering, but I saw it, the flicker of recognition, the brief falter of confidence. Good. I took a sip of wine, letting the silence stretch between us. Let him wonder. Let him think I knew something, but not how much. "She mentioned something about an estate sale," I continued casually, watching him closely. "Strange, don't you think? Considering I never put Clark Manor up for sale." Nathan chuckled, but this time it lacked the same effortless charm. "That's interesting," he said, reaching for his whiskey, the movement just a little too forced. "I'm sure it's a misunderstanding." "I'm sure it is," I murmured, my smile never wavering. He turned away, taking a deep sip of his drink, unaware that in that moment he had already lost. Because while he thought he was playing me, I was already writing the final chapter of his empire. Nathan had always been a master of deception, a man who thrived on control, weaving lies so seamlessly into reality that most people never questioned them. But tonight, I saw something I had never seen before: uncertainty. It was in the way he gripped his whiskey glass just a little too tightly, the way his gaze flickered to his phone before he could stop himself. He was calculating, searching for the best way to cover his tracks. He must have assumed I only had suspicions, not concrete proof. Good. Let him think that. I set my glass down and turned toward the panoramic view of the city skyline, the glow of the streetlights illuminating the streets below. For years, I had stood by his side, watching him build his empire, believing that we were a team. But tonight, I knew better. Nathan had never seen me as an equal. I reached into my pocket and ran my fingers over the small USB drive I had retrieved earlier that day. A simple piece of metal and plastic that held the truth. While Nathan had spent years thinking I was oblivious, I had been watching. Months ago, I had noticed the missing funds, the inconsistencies in our accounts, the late-night phone calls he thought I slept through. He was moving money, hiding assets, preparing for something. But I hadn't understood what until today. He wasn't just preparing to leave me. He was preparing to disappear entirely. The sale of Clark Manor was just the beginning. I turned back to Nathan, who was still pretending to be relaxed, scrolling through his phone with feigned interest. The moment I had mentioned the real estate agent, his entire demeanor had shifted, and now he was barely holding it together. "You seem distracted," I said, tilting my head slightly. Nathan forced a smirk, setting his glass down with a soft clink against the marble counter. "Just work," he replied smoothly. "A few deals that need closing." Lies. "I imagine selling a historic estate must be quite a big deal." That did it. For the first time in years, Nathan miscalculated. His breath hitched, just slightly, just enough for someone less observant to miss. But I saw it. I felt it. His face remained neutral, but his jaw tensed ever so slightly. He was panicking. I smiled. "Funny thing," I continued, my voice light, playful even. "The buyer, a private investment trust, apparently. The agent wouldn't say much, but she did let something slip." Nathan raised an eyebrow, masking his concern. "Oh," I took a step closer, savoring this moment. "The buyer isn't a company," I said, watching him closely. "It's a single investor, someone who has been planning this purchase for months." A flicker of something flashed in his eyes, recognition. I leaned in just a little, enough to make him uncomfortable. "What I find interesting is that the paperwork is almost identical to another property transfer from 3 years ago, one that involved a series of offshore accounts." Nathan's grip on his whiskey glass tightened. He knew exactly what I was talking about. 3 years ago, he had convinced me to co-sign on a supposed investment opportunity, one that had mysteriously vanished, along with nearly $500,000. I had let it go, thinking it was just a bad deal, a mistake. Now I knew better. "That's ridiculous," he scoffed, forcing a chuckle. "You're overthinking this." I smiled. Am I? The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken truths. Nathan was cornered. He couldn't deny it outright, not without giving away just how deep his deception ran. "Look, Elena," I held up a hand, stopping him. "Save it." I turned away, walking toward the bedroom, my heart pounding with the thrill of the game. For the first time, he was the one left scrambling. As I reached for the door handle, I paused. "Oh, and Nathan?" I glanced over my shoulder, meeting his darkened gaze. I think I'll be stopping by Clark Manor again tomorrow. Then, without another word, I walked into the bedroom and shut the door behind me. Nathan wouldn't sleep tonight. And that was exactly what I wanted. The next morning, I arrived at Clark Manor before the real estate agent. The sun was barely rising over the treetops, casting a golden glow on the grand estate Nathan had secretly tried to sell. A property he had always claimed to cherish, until now. Standing at the edge of the long driveway, I let my eyes roam over the towering Victorian home, its ornate iron gates slightly ajar as if welcoming me in, or daring me to uncover its secrets. The truth was, I had never fully understood Nathan's obsession with Clark Manor. It was never just an investment for him. It was a symbol, a key to something bigger. But I had never pressed him on it, assuming it was just one of his many projects. Now, I knew better. As I pushed open the heavy front doors, a familiar scent of aged wood and forgotten history filled my lungs. The grand chandelier overhead swayed slightly, its crystals catching the early morning light. This place was supposed to be ours, a legacy, and yet he had put it up for sale without hesitation. I walked through the main hallway, my heels clicking against the polished hardwood floors, the silence so thick it felt suffocating. The furniture was still here, pristine, untouched, as if someone had walked out and left everything behind. Someone like Nathan. My fingers brushed over the carved banister as I climbed the grand staircase, my mind racing with every theory I had pieced together over the last few months. The missing funds, the offshore accounts, the late-night phone calls. This house wasn't just another deal for Nathan. It was a cover-up. A sharp creak made me stop mid-step. I wasn't alone. My pulse hammered as I turned my head toward the sound. A shadow flickered down the hallway, too fast to be a trick of the light. My fingers instinctively curled into fists as I forced my voice steady. Who's there? Silence. For a moment, I considered leaving, walking away and letting the authorities deal with whatever this was. But then, something caught my eye. A single envelope, sealed in red wax, sitting on the edge of the hallway table. I approached slowly, heart pounding as I recognized the handwriting. Nathan's. With trembling fingers, I broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter inside. Elena, if you're reading this, it means I didn't have time to stop you. You need to leave. Now, there are things you don't understand, things I never told you. This house, it was never just an investment. It was leverage. And if you don't leave right now, you're going to find out why the hard way. A rush of cold dread settled in my stomach. He knew. He knew I would come here. He knew I would look deeper. And most importantly, he knew someone else was watching too. I turned on my heel, my breath coming in sharp bursts as I moved quickly back toward the front door. My mind was screaming at me to get out, to run, but my instincts told me I was already too late. As I reached the entrance, a dark figure stepped into the doorway, blocking my path. A man I had never seen before, dressed in an expensive black suit, wearing the kind of confidence that only comes with absolute control. And then, he smiled. "You're smarter than I expected, Mrs. Clark." My stomach twisted into knots. He knew my name. Nathan's secrets ran deeper than I ever imagined, and I had just walked straight into them. The stranger's smile was too controlled, his posture too composed for someone who had just been caught standing in a house that should have been empty. His presence radiated a quiet authority, the kind that sent a silent but unmistakable warning. I am not someone you want to cross. Every nerve in my body screamed danger. I tightened my grip on the letter still clutched in my hands, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. "Who are you?" I demanded, forcing steel into my voice. The man's smirk didn't waver. He wasn't intimidated. If anything, he seemed amused. "Let's not waste time with unnecessary questions, Mrs. Clark," he said, his voice a smooth blend of charm and menace. "You're clearly intelligent, and intelligent people don't walk into places they shouldn't be without expecting consequences." My stomach clenched. Consequences. I took a subtle step back, my mind racing for an escape route. Every door, every window, every possible way out. But the man simply tilted his head, as if reading my thoughts. "Running would be a mistake," he mused, almost entertained by the idea. "If I wanted to hurt you, you wouldn't have made it past the front gate." Cold fear coiled around my spine. This wasn't just about Nathan selling the house. This was bigger. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice carefully measured. He chuckled, finally stepping forward, closing the space between us. His expensive shoes barely made a sound against the floor, his presence swallowing the air in the room. "Not what I want, Mrs. Clark." He glanced at the letter in my hand. "It's about what your husband already gave me." The weight of his words sank in like a stone. Nathan had done something serious, something that had brought this man here. I swallowed hard. "Nathan isn't here?" The man's expression didn't change, as if he already knew that. "No, he's not." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. He was waiting for me to put the pieces together. I did. Nathan had been desperate to sell the house, not just for the money, but to get out of something. This house wasn't just an asset, it was evidence. "This has nothing to do with me," I said, keeping my voice even. "Nathan made his choices. If you're looking for him, I can't help you." The man exhaled through his nose, as if disappointed. "You're right, Mrs. Clark. You're not the one I want." For a split second, relief flickered through me. Then he stepped closer, so close I could smell the faint trace of cologne and control. "But you're the only leverage I have left." Before I could move, his hand darted out, snatching my wrist with terrifying precision. I barely had time to suck in a breath before a sharp sting pierced my skin. Something small, something cold. A needle. My vision blurred instantly. My knees buckled. The room spun violently. The last thing I saw before the world went dark was his smile. Controlled, calculated, deadly. Darkness clung to me like a second skin. My head throbbed violently, each pulse hammering against my skull like a war drum. The world felt distant, sounds muffled, my limbs heavy and uncooperative. I forced my eyes open, but something was wrong. The light above me was too bright, too sterile, and a soft, mechanical hum filled the air. This wasn't my house. Panic surged through me like wildfire. I tried to move. Nothing. My wrists and ankles burned with the realization that they were bound to the chair I was slumped in. A single overhead bulb cast long, eerie shadows against the dark walls. A basement? A warehouse? I tried to breathe through the panic, but my mouth was dry, my throat raw. I had to think. I had to focus. "Good. You're awake." The voice. His voice. I stiffened as the man from my house emerged from the shadows, perfectly composed, unbothered. "Sorry about the method," he said, rolling up his sleeves, revealing a silver watch that looked expensive enough to buy a small country. "You weren't going to come willingly, and time is a luxury I don't have." "What do you want?" My voice came out hoarse, but it didn't shake. He sighed, like a teacher dealing with a particularly slow student. "Let's talk about Nathan." I clenched my jaw. "Of course. Your husband made a deal he couldn't afford." The man leaned against a sleek metal desk, watching me like a puzzle he was slowly solving. And when the consequences came knocking, he did what cowards do. He paused, giving me a meaningful look. He ran. My stomach tightened. Nathan, gone, leaving me in the wreckage of whatever mess he'd created. I have nothing to do with his business, I said carefully, testing the restraints. They didn't budge. And yet, the man mused, he listed you as collateral. The words hit me like a truck. Collateral. My pulse roared in my ears. Nathan had put me up as collateral. That's impossible, I whispered, but I already knew the truth. It wasn't. Nathan had kept secrets. Big ones. I just hadn't realized how deep they ran. You don't believe me? The man pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward me. A contract, my name, my signature. My breath caught in my throat. Forgery is an art, the man said smoothly, watching my expression shift from shock to rage. Your husband, a very skilled artist. Nathan had forged my signature, signed away my life without me even knowing. I felt a dangerous calm settle in my bones. So what now? I asked, my voice even, hiding the storm brewing inside me. The man's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. That depends. He took a step closer, tilting his head slightly. Are you smarter than your husband? His eyes were assessing, like he was waiting for me to understand something. And I did. Nathan was gone. The debt remained. And I was the only thing left to bargain with. But I wasn't Nathan, and I never played to lose. I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze head-on. Try me. The man studied me for a long, quiet moment. Then he smiled, and the game began. The man's smile was slow and deliberate, like he was savoring a private joke. He tapped a finger against the table, watching me as though I were a particularly interesting chess piece. I like that, he murmured. You're not panicking. That's good. Desperation makes people sloppy. I wasn't panicking, but my mind was moving at breakneck speed, analyzing every word, every movement. If I was going to get out of this, I needed to understand him first. Let's talk options, he said, his voice smooth, almost amused. He pulled out a sleek black folder and flipped it open. My name was printed in bold across the top of the document. Not just my name, everything about me, employment history, finances, even the house I grew up in. A cold chill ran down my spine, but I kept my face neutral. Showing weakness wasn't an option. You're resourceful, he continued, smart, independent. Unlike your husband, you actually have potential, which means you have two choices. He leaned forward slightly. One, you pay me what Nathan owed. Every cent with interest. I held his gaze. And how much is that? He flipped a page. $10 million. I didn't blink. I couldn't afford to. And my second option? I asked, forcing my voice to remain even. The man tilted his head, considering me. You work for me. My stomach tightened. Doing what? That depends. He leaned back in his chair, studying me like he was assessing a new recruit. You see, your husband wasn't just in debt. He was a liability. He tried to play in a world he didn't understand, making promises he couldn't keep. And you? I asked carefully. I keep my promises. There was something chilling in the simplicity of his words. So, what exactly would I be doing? I pressed. You have a background in finance, don't you? He flipped another page in the file. Worked with private equity firms, handled high-risk investments. Nathan was a gambler. You know how to calculate risk. He was right, and that terrified me. Because he wasn't offering me a choice. He was testing me. What happens if I say no? I asked. The man exhaled slowly, almost disappointed. That would be unfortunate. He gestured toward the contract. Nathan put you in this position. I'm giving you a way out, and I don't make that offer twice." Silence stretched between us, the air thick with tension. I could sign and become part of his world, a world Nathan had stumbled into and been destroyed by. Or I could refuse and face the consequences. But there was a third option, one he wasn't expecting. I reached for the pen, fingers steady, and signed my name. The man's smile widened, but he didn't realize I wasn't playing his game. I was about to change the rules. The moment the pen left the paper, sealing my fate with a flourish of ink, I knew there was no turning back. The contract was signed, but the game had just begun. The man, whom I now knew as Victor Langston, a name whispered in high-stakes circles like a storm warning, watched me with a smirk. He thought he had me cornered. "Smart choice," he murmured, sliding the contract back into his sleek black folder. "I knew you'd see reason." "Reason? No, Victor. I see opportunity." He stood, smoothing his tailored suit, and motioned for me to follow. I did, keeping my steps measured, my heartbeat steady, even as the gravity of the situation pressed against my ribs. Victor led me through a side entrance of the upscale restaurant, down a dimly lit corridor that smelled of expensive whiskey and polished mahogany. A heavy steel door loomed ahead. He pressed his palm to a biometric scanner, and with a low beep, the door slid open. Inside was another world entirely. A sleek, state-of-the-art operations room, walls lined with monitors flashing real-time stock data, offshore banking transactions, and coded messages. Several well-dressed individuals moved with precise efficiency, their conversations hushed but purposeful. This wasn't just a business, it was an empire. Victor walked to a large table at the center, motioning for me to sit. "Welcome to the real game, Evelyn," he said smoothly. I sat, clasping my hands on the table, masking the thrill of adrenaline coursing through me. "What exactly is my role in this operation?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Victor's gaze sharpened. "You're going to clean up the mess your husband made," he said bluntly, dropping a thick file in front of me. I flipped it open. Nathan's financial records, and they were worse than I had imagined. Not only had he borrowed money, but he had embezzled from investors, forged documents, and made reckless trades that had collapsed entire accounts. "You're an expert in high-risk investments," Victor continued. "Your job is to recover what's salvageable and, more importantly, protect my interests." "And if I refuse?" I asked, testing him. Victor smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "You already signed the contract, sweetheart. There is no refusing." A slow breath. I glanced at the screens, the numbers flashing in rapid sequences. My mind worked quickly, assessing leverage points, vulnerabilities, and gaps in the system. Victor believed he owned me now. He thought I would play by his rules. But what he didn't know was that I had spent years watching people like him from the outside, learning, calculating, preparing. Nathan had been reckless. I wasn't. "Fine," I said, snapping the file shut. "I'll do it." Victor nodded in approval. "Good. I expect a full report by tomorrow morning." I stood, forcing myself to walk away without hesitation, feeling his eyes track my every move. Once outside, I exhaled slowly, the night air crisp against my skin. Victor believed he had backed me into a corner, but he had no idea that I was already planning my next move. He had given me access to his empire, and I was going to use it to burn him to the ground. By the time the sun rose, I had already been awake for hours, meticulously setting the final pieces of my plan into motion. Victor had made one fatal mistake. He assumed I was here to clean up Nathan's mess. But I wasn't just fixing what my husband had broken. I was taking control. Nathan had always underestimated me. He saw me as a convenient, quiet wife, someone who handled the finer things, social events, dinner parties, charitable functions. He never realized I had been watching, learning, calculating. Victor, on the other hand, was different. He was dangerous, but he was also arrogant, and that arrogance would be his undoing. At precisely 7 a.m., I arrived at Victor's office, stepping into the same high-tech operation room I had seen the night before. Today was different. Today, I was in charge. Victor was already seated at the long glass conference table, a cigar burning between his fingers. He didn't bother looking up as I placed my files on the table. "Tell me you have good news," he said. "I have something better," I replied smoothly, sliding a thick folder toward him. Victor finally looked up, intrigued. He opened the file, scanning the neatly organized pages. Then his face changed, from confident to calculating, from calculating to concerned. I had him. "What is this?" he asked. His voice suddenly clipped. I leaned forward. "That's the evidence I compiled overnight," I said. "A full breakdown of your offshore accounts, fake investments, money laundering, fraud, tax evasion, and let's not forget the bribery charges waiting to happen if the right people see these documents." Victor's cigar smoldered in the ashtray, untouched. "You were supposed to fix this," he growled. "Not hand me a damn death sentence." I smiled. "Oh, I did fix it," I said. "Just not for you." A slow, heavy silence filled the room. Victor's fingers curled into a fist, but he didn't dare move, because he knew. He had been outplayed. "Let me explain what happens next," I continued, keeping my voice soft, controlled. "As we speak, these documents are being delivered to the authorities. Your accounts have been flagged for immediate investigation. Your top lieutenants, they've already been approached with deals to testify against you." I sat back, crossing my legs. "Oh, and Nathan," I added. "He's already on a private jet to Europe. Turns out he was more than happy to cooperate in exchange for protection." Victor's jaw ticked. He wasn't used to losing, but he had never played against me. "What do you want?" he asked, voice tight. "I want you gone," I said simply. "I want you out of the city, out of this business. I want you to disappear before the authorities catch up." He laughed, low and sharp. "And if I don't?" I tapped the final page of the file, where a photo of his daughter was clipped to the corner. "Then the people you've been stealing from will come looking," I said. "And I don't think they'll be as polite as me." Victor's face went pale. I stood, gathering my things, leaving him sitting there in the ruins of his empire. "You have 24 hours, I told him. Use them wisely." And then I walked away. Victor Langston had been a king in his world, but today I had taken his crown. As I walked away from the wreckage of Victor's empire, a strange sense of clarity settled over me. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about reclaiming power, about proving that the ones who are underestimated, the ones who move quietly in the background, are often the ones who hold the real control. Nathan had betrayed me. He had gambled with my trust, my future, and thought he could walk away unscathed. He thought I would crumble. But what he failed to realize was that I had been watching, learning, and preparing for this moment all along. And in the end, it wasn't just about exposing his lies. It was about ensuring that no man, no Victor, no Nathan would ever have the chance to do this again. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about strategy, strength, and the kind of justice that doesn't need a courtroom to be served. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Men's Cheating Story for more thrilling tales of karma and deception. Who do you think got what they deserved? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to turn on notifications for the next chapter.